Miguel, Neil, thank you so much for joining me today. This is such a cool topic that we're speaking about because I don't think a lot of people realize how much infrastructure development is needed in a park. For me, it was almost strange to think that you would build in a protected area. Miguel, can you please explain to me why would you build in a protected area? Should these areas not remain untouched by humans?
Lésa, in ideal world probably, and if I could choose, yes. But first of all, I think it's important that we expose these areas to the public. Also, and probably and most importantly is that to manage these areas, to keep them as more pristine as possible, it costs, and these infrastructures is needed also so we can have enough revenues to manage the park.
So what have you guys built in Maputo National Park?
In terms of tourism, we currently have two concessions from private investment. One, a five-star lodge at a place called Shemukan, a partnership with between a community association and a private sector. It's a five-star lodge, and also another concession at Mili Bangalala, also private investment. Five-star lodge also. We in partnership with Peace Parks Foundation, when I say we, ANAC and the Mozambique government in partnership with ANAC, we are building a place called Ponte Membene to be a two to three star lodge that will open to a different market than the previous one that I mentioned. At the same time, we have constructed amazing and beautiful campsites, some with very nice facilities and others more rustic. Also to make, again, the park available for different markets.
Neil, I think this is where you come in. You've been tasked to design quite a bit of infrastructure in Maputo National Park. Can you tell us a little bit about some of that and some of the things that you consider when building in a protected area?
Yes, Lisa, thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be able to work in areas like that. And I take that honor very seriously. I've been privileged to work with Peace Parks Foundation and ANAC for that matter for many years. I think our first project together was the development of the infrastructure in the Parque Nacional de Limpopo in 2003, I think, was when we started on that. And one thing that working in a conservation area would be a lot easier than working in town. You know, in town you have all sorts of building lines and bylaws and servitudes and what else. But in fact, those things guide you in what you do as a designer. If you're in the middle of a completely unspoiled area, there's nothing to guide you. So it makes it a lot more difficult, and especially if you take that design work in a serious manner. We have developed for the Maputo National Park what we call architectural guidelines, or architectural language document rather, which guides the design of infrastructure in that particular conservation area. And it touches on things like natural landscapes and features. It looks at existing infrastructure. Obviously, you cannot work in a void. You need to work in context when you do any architectural work for that matter, maybe even more so in cities. It looks at cultural influences that one should be taking into account, the people that live there, in and surrounding that conservation area. And then, very importantly, it looks at natural materials and skills that are available. Whenever possible, we try and introduce and make use of those elements in the work that we do. And then, obviously, the site conditions are very important. In the case of the Maputo National Park, They're all deep sand roads, which makes access difficult. You can only drive there by using a 4x4 vehicle. You need to look at the slopes on the site that you're going to develop on, at the natural vegetation, at wind directions, all sort of things that become much more important when you work in a conservation area than when you work in the middle of a city. I mean, I live in Pretoria, and the one thing we do not consider here is wind, because we don't have wind. It's the most wind-still city in the world. So it's not a big factor, but definitely next to the sea in Membene, you hear the sea because of the prevailing wind conditions. Sometimes you don't. So those things become very important to take into account.
Can I ask, why do you take things like culture and into consideration when you design for a protected area?
I know that it's one of the very utmost important objectives of Peace Parks Foundation and the conservation authorities of most African countries, and I know ANAC in particular as well, and that is to make the park accessible, first of all, to everybody, but also to realize that there are people that live in and around the park that should benefit from the park and that should feel at home in the park. And if you can use things like materials or in the case where you have an operational lodge, for instance, artifacts that are made by the people in the area and sometimes inside the reserves, then that will be much more the case. Secondly, I believe it's important to offer the guests that go to a conservation area an experience that they will remember for a long time, but also will connect with not only the natural environment, but also the people that live in that area. I mean, if you've ever been to the Kahookaveld and you haven't made contact with the Ovahimba, then you haven't been there. You know, you might as well not have gone there. So I think it's very important that we try and bring that into the equation. It's not always that easy, and in many conservation areas, the people that surround it have not been able to take part in the mainstream tourism development, but I know it is the objective of both Peace Parks Foundation and ANAC to do so, and I really hope that it will be the case in the Maputo National Park as well.
So we've seen sneak peeks of the new Membene infrastructure development, and it's incredible. I mean, it is going to be one of, I think, Mozambique's most beautiful tourism facilities that's ever been built, frankly, because obviously Maputo National Park is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Neil, so you obviously took nature into consideration in your designs. I mean, that's very clear from how the buildings are sort of folding around the trees, that kind of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how you considered nature in your designs?
Lésa, yes, that's a mouthful. You're quite right. I believe that man cannot improve on nature. Whatever we do, we will detract from a natural environment. So the best thing we can do, and the most responsible thing we can do and should do, is to respect the environment that you're working in. And I think the part of the architectural language document points that out, that we wanted to touch the earth lightly with whatever we built in Maputo National Park. For a number of reasons. The one is that should you consider the infrastructure having to be taken away at any point in time in future, you can do so very easily. You just pick it up and you take it off site, which is different to normal and conventional construction methods where you have to dig foundation trenches or put all sorts of concrete and stuff into the ground. These buildings are built without any cement. The poles are put into the sand, a little bit of soilcrete, and then built with lightweight materials, which, as you said, tries to blend in with nature. Now, to do that, we had to find the spots for all these buildings to go, first of all. Secondly, take into account the remoteness of the site and the design, very much apart from opening up the building to the surrounding forestful areas and wildlife that you can see there. Also takes cognizance of the fact that you have to get everything there with a 4x4. you can't drive big trucks in there. So you're looking at small, lightweight building components that preferably are manufactured off-site, because having people stay on-site costs lots of money and it's more impact on the site as well. So it's manufactured off-site, it's taken to site, it's actually carried on-site by people, not by trucks or front-end loaders or whatever. People carry the building material to each and every site because the site is surrounded by very dense forest vegetation, and only a small opening was created in between the bigger trees, pardon, which are were all retained, and then they construct this building. So it's definitely not a conventional building methodology that we used, and it calls for fairly innovative design details. But the idea was to design a new building system completely with its own guiding rules as to how you build it and how you treat it and how you make it waterproof and so on and so on. It's been quite a task, I can assure you. I don't think we've ever prepared so many technical drawings on any project I've ever worked on in my life as we did for this one. Miguel has seen some of them, stacks and stacks of drawing, because normally when you draw a plan and you draw a wall of a building, you've got two lines and every so often you've got a window in between it. But when you build this system that we designed, you need like 10 drawings just to indicate how the wall is put together, because it's a building system that, as I said, that are made off-site and assembled on-site, almost like a Meccano set. If you would like to go into the more detail of how that building system works, then I'm not sure how much time we have, but I'll be very happy to take you through it. Or we can come back to the details should you want to at a later stage.
And you're welcome to share with us some of the details. I think that would be fascinating.
Okay. All right. So as I said, it's a lightweight building system. First of all, to meet the requirement of touch the earth lightly, which is more an environmental consideration than anything else. Although in this particular case, it's also a practical consideration. We can't bring tons of concrete and bricks and whatever onto site, because in the process you will destroy the road and do a heavy impact on site. So the units are constructed by putting poles into the sand, into a soil-concrete mix, and built up to floor level, as they do most of the buildings along the Mozambican coast, which is a timber frame technology. Years ago we built Miguel's offices in Ponte de Oro as well, and a few ranger outposts in Maputo at that time, Maputo Special Reserve, using this timber frame technology, which is a fairly standard practice, and most contractors in Mozambique know how to do it. It's the same system that they use for most houses in America and many in Europe and other places. In South Africa we don't do a lot of that, I must be honest. All right, but up to floor level, that's where you build it. And then you carry onto this platform that you have, that's either got marine ply floors, which will later be clad with a tile, or it will be deck planks. But onto this platform you carry the laminated pine structural components. They're 130 by 130 millimeter laminated beams. We use laminated timber because it's stronger, firstly, and secondly, to get a solid piece of timber of that dimension, you'll have to cut down a lot of trees. And we all know that laminated timber is something that you take offcuts and you just glue them all together under high pressure and temperature, and then you end up having a very strong structural element. All right, so they then put up upright the columns on top of the floor. The beams are fitted onto these. All these elements are pre-cut to length. They pre-notched, they pre-drilled. So you put this whole thing together like a Meccano set. You then put on the roof panels, and they are called SIP, Structural Insulated Panels, actually made by Isowall, a company in Pretoria, and they built cold rooms and freezers all over Africa using this material. I don't think it's been used as a roofing material before. It might have been, I'm not aware of it, but it's got wonderful insulation properties. It makes for a very clean design because you don't need all sorts of purlins and trusses and whatever underneath it. It can span unsupported for 5 meter lengths. And you end up having a single element that once you've carried it on site, you have a ceiling, you have insulation inside the ceiling, and you have the roof cover on top. So, it makes for far better, quicker, cleaner construction than the normal conventional roof construction. So the roof panels are put up, and the design of the roofs were such that we had a very low slope on it, and the roof was broken up into smaller components. The last thing we wanted to do was for the roof to stick out of the forest tree canopy, and be able to preferably not to see it at all. It also meant that when you're inside the building, you were able to look out underneath these roof panels. Above the ring beam, there are either glass or a fine mesh to allow views into the tree canopy around you. Remember, part of the objectives is to make people very much aware of nature and experience the Maputo National Park in that way. All right, then after the roof panels are up, you put up the timber frames that support the walls. We have walls in the building. They're clad on the outside of fiber cement board. There's a vapor barrier. All the services get put into the void of the wall, your plumbing, your electrical conduits and so on. And then lastly, a bit of insulation goes in, and the internal cladding gets put onto the frames. The windows are all pre-fitted aluminium windows, the glass infitted already. And that's put into the walls, and you end up building a building in, I would think, a third of the time it would normally take to construct such a building. I mean, I'm talking about time on site. Obviously, to make these things off-site takes a lot of time as well. So, but that doesn't impact on what we're busy doing on site. All right, so the whole idea is to have a building that fits snugly in between trees underneath the roof canopy, with fairly open inside-outside spaces. The living areas, all these chalets, and most of them are self-catering, but there are a number that are catered chalets as well. But the living spaces are open. It's got a wall on one side in which a little kitchen fits. It might have a glass part on the other side, and it's got a front door, but it's actually an open living space that makes you feel like you're part of the wonderful forest that in which these units are placed. And the same goes for other areas like the main bedroom, where part of the wall actually slides open in total, leaving you in contact with nature out there. And you can close it at night time. Obviously, we go to bed, or when it's raining. Not that rain is a big factor. Luckily, wind-driven rain gets broken by the tree cover over you. But to say, it is a closable space. All right, so I just think that the opportunity of working in this park and the challenges that lie in the remoteness of the site and the difficulty of access, and the fact that we had to have as little impact as possible on site, actually ended up in us having to design a very unique building system that hopefully achieves the objectives that we set it out to do.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the more unique challenges? So, I mean, we understand the terrain is difficult, but some of the more unique challenges that you guys faced while working in a protected area. So the kind of things that would never happen if you were building in a city, for example.
Lésa, is this Miguel that's now having to face this one, or shall I talk to it first? I know he will also have a view on what we were doing there. So, Miguel, if you'd like to set the stage, I'll be more than happy for you to do so.
No, it was a question for you. I didn't want to build in first place. So.
Okay, you bowled out on that one, so I can't feel the shot that easily. Okay, all right, Miguel, no problem. You can should I've left anything out, I'm sure you will be able to correct me very nicely at the end of it. All right, Lésa, I touched briefly on the challenges that were put to our side regarding the documentation, design and documentation of these buildings. We still now, after, I think we started, Miguel, if I remember correctly, in 2017, we started looking at where the development should go with the Peace Parks Foundation's planning team, looking at the sites that we were to use. And it took quite a while to finalize the sites and what should be done on them. So, but once we started doing the detailed design, I think that was in 2019, It's now 2022. We're still doing drawings, believe it or not. So one of the challenges definitely is to document an alternative construction method. I don't think I'll ever do something like this again, not if I can help it. It's just so much work. Secondly, the positioning of each and every building on site was another challenge, and this Miguel knows. He's seen us quite often. Louis van der Merwe, our project manager, myself, we used to come down, and still do, come down to site once a month, and then spend a lot of time crawling through the bushes, positioning units, setting out roads. And at that time, the undergrowth, and especially now in the rainy season, but even in winter time, the undergrowth is so thick that Louis would walk away 20 meters from me to where we think the next unit should be positioned. And I'd ask him, Louis, okay, shout, wave your arms, I can't see you. I couldn't position where he is because it's just so thick bush. So eventually we managed to set these things out without getting trampled by elephant or chased by hippo or bitten by snakes somehow. And then we marked the sites with danger tape, this red and white stuff you see when they put around manholes, they dig on the roads and so on. We marked the sites with a piece of danger tape and then go away. And then a month or two, maybe sometimes later, we go back onto site to now go into the next step. Now, either get the environmental person to come and inspect or start putting in some of the services which went underground before we started building the units. And then we had to redo the job because the elephant has taken down all the danger tape. They don't like danger tape, for whatever reason. So they would take it down and we'd get there and the danger tape will still be there, but it's lying on the ground. Okay, so we had to go and redo the job. All right, and I think then maybe another challenge is that we faced was to convince everybody that this is an experience that if you just put up normal buildings, you might not make the most of it, if I can put it like that. And Miguel, I know you will support me here. We built a prototype of the ablutions at the campsite at Lagoa Shuguti that everybody inspected. Yourself, the project manager in the park, and Anthony. We even had the CEO of Peace Parks the other day. Werner flew in with some of the donors that happened to be in Maputo, and they flew in with the chopper. So we had like everybody there, that had an opinion on this. And they looked at this prototype of the campsite ablution that was built. And there were many questions. And I remember Miguel posed one that almost floored us. He said, listen, you South African guys, you used to camping, you go and camp all over Africa. But remember in Mozambique, we don't do so much camping. And now we get to this campsite and you have this ablution building and the walls don't even go down to the floor. It's open there. And it's open on top, over the top's not a big problem, but it means the snakes will get in there, Now, what now? So luckily, Paul Boucher at that time gave the right answer. Miguel, that's true. But you must keep in mind, the snakes will get in there anyway, because they're not people here all the time. So the snakes, they also like a bit of protection. So they'll get inside the building. And if you open the door to the toilet and the wall goes all the way to the floor, there's only one way that snake will get out of there. And that's between your legs. And you said, okay, fine, let's build it like this. So that was it, end of argument. And I think the same thing applies to the chalets and the restaurant and the things we're building now. They're not 100% closed, and it could be that you have a very windy, cold evening in wintertime where you might wish that somebody had actually closed up this living room. But then you put an extra jersey on, and because if you close up the thing, you will lose out on the 99% of the time that the weather is nice, and that you are very much in contact with nature close by. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve. So it took a while, to convince everybody. It also took a while to convince people that a very modern building, not using, what's the right word, natural shapes and non-man-made materials, because all the timber are planed timber. They're not rough poles and lats like we've done in many other places in Africa. But it's a very modern, very simple design, and to get that to blend in with nature, I think a lot of people questioned the design in the beginning. But now that's the campsite ablutions have been built, and they like a smaller version of what we're building for the tourism facilities, the chalets and the restaurants. I think now people are starting to realize that sometimes having a minimalistic approach, in contrast to Mother Nature, might be the best way to blend in with nature. Rather than to have all earthy sort of things and then, you know, maybe it doesn't blend that well either. So that's just the view that we have taken, and we will know in a couple of months' time when we finish with this project whether we managed to achieve that or not. Okay, so those were some of the challenges that we had to face. Lésa, Miguel, you had none. You had this wonderful team you're working with that never gave you any trouble and always went time and never got lost and so on.
Well, I think the biggest challenge was to build in a area without damaging a lot the place. You know, not just being another lodge, you know, and all from the environmental assessment impact was done. It was very well discussed. So I think that was find a good solution. A very sensitive area that I think Neil just I'm just summarizing. I think what he said, and as Neil said, it's not true that everybody had an opinion because I didn't have. Because it's too technical for me. But I think it made it a good match, you know. A lot of people discussing it, and I think that made the good solution that we found to build Membene. Again, I think the biggest challenge was to find the right way to build a good infrastructure, a good lodge in a very sensitive area. Building, let's say, behind the primary dunes to protect the primary dunes and also the infrastructures from stronger winds. Those kinds of decisions, and find ways to do it from.
Can you tell us a little bit about the requirements that you sort of, some of the things that you thought were super important?
Lisa, a team, a good team, was probably the most important. Obviously, we can't ignore the partners that made the funding available to do it. That was key, obviously. But I think above all was the whole team, and it was a lot of people involved, from the designing the concept, the thought process, to where we are today, building it. So was one of the most, if not important, in this process.
So what are you most proud of?
You know, guarantee the security and protection of both and marine component. You know, the grow our staff in number, but in quality also. And the game relocation, bringing back animals that were here in the past, and see numbers increasing. You know, around 5,000 animals back into the park with the rest of, and now being able to invest in tourism infrastructures, from signage, improving our gates, and building a lodge that will be owned by the park. So, you know, it's the whole success story, that process that was well thought and well planned to be where we are now and knowing where we want to go. So I'll say that's, you know, most proud of the whole story, whole history of the last 15 years of now the Maputo National Park.
But I mean, it is one of the most remarkable stories, success stories of conservation.
From small things to us, you know, our marine rangers skip a boat at night. You know, Alvar was actually very scared of water, and he's probably now our best skipper. You know, I think that it's a good summary of where we started and where we are now. Same on the terrestrial component, the increase of the staff, not just in numbers, as I said, but the quality and the commitment of the personnel that we have and how passionate they are about their jobs. All of these is just small bits that, makes us proud. It's the whole package. When you know that your turtles are safe, from being heavily poached to none, and all other stories like that. So, it's difficult to tell you just one moment. So it's been a lot. Neil mentioned, and he called wrong the Miguel office. It's not. It was the Ponta do Ouro Partial Marine office, HQ. Mine, I just wish. That was really proud also. We had our first picket, our HQ, but in the end, it's a overall success story of this park.
Do you think that the guests that will be staying in all of the places that Neil and his teams have designed, do you think that guests will be able to experience some of that success when they visit?
One thing is, it's different from us because we know where we came from, and not all the guests will know where we came from. It's game everywhere. The ocean is amazing. The life at the ocean is also, and the infrastructure are there.
Neil, what are some of the things that you are most proud of over the years of developing infrastructure in Maputo National Park?
Lésa, as Miguel mentioned just now, this park has been coming a long way, and I've been very fortunate to have met Miguel right at the beginning of it in 2010, when we were also involved in the design and construction of the Partial Marine, Ponta do Ouro Partial Marine's head office in Ponta do Ouro, and a few rangers outposts in the Maputo Special Reserve at that time. All right, but coming back to your question then, I think what's making me proud already is to see this coming together. When you design an alternative construction methodology like these buildings are, and I must admit I've done it a few times before, it seems like I haven't learned my lesson. The first one was when we built the Scissors Flay Lodge in Namibia on the way to the Scissors Flay at Cesrim, where we built a lodge for a client with tents, canvas rooms, bedrooms. And he did warn us about the Ost wind, which comes down every year in the middle of the winter. That blows up to 120 kilometers an hour. But we persuaded him to do tented facilities. And that was a challenge. I won't go into the detail. We've also built things with sandbags in the Kalahari, and we've built things with pre-made, German manufactured panels that you put up and you give 2 coats of plaster, and then you end up having a wall. In fact, I built my house with it as well. That's as good as a brick wall. But until the thing is actually built, you never know whether it's going to work that well. So it is a bit of a challenge. So it's very, very rewarding to see it coming together now. But to me, the best reward would be if once we finish with the project and the guests arrive, the visitors to Ponta Membene, and they say 2 things about the development. The first is that they didn't know there were any buildings until they almost got to the threshold thereof. That's when they saw the buildings. So that would be fantastic if that can be said after development. And then secondly, if they have this experience, which has been one of the main objectives of everybody on the team, and that is to offer people an experience in Maputo National Park that they will never forget, that they really feel like they're part of what's happening there. And if they go back and I say, listen, this is what happened to us. We had this incredible few days or week, hopefully even longer, at Ponta Membene, and hopefully later at other places in the park that might still be developed. And we felt Mother Nature. And there is no better place on earth than the Maputo National Park. It's one of my favorite conservation areas as well. I know a lot of other people also. I think Lésa's yours as well. I do know Miguel. Definitely. So if we can achieve that, then it would be the very, very proud moment for all of us.
So Miguel, what's next? What are you guys building next?
In terms of tourism, hopefully Shinguti. Currently, all the lodges are very marine based, the main attraction being the coast. But we have these beautiful lakes, and Shinguti has a beautiful bird life. We already have a campsite, a really beautiful and nice campsite at Shinguti. And hopefully, when life's back to normal after the pandemic, we will try again to tender for Shinguti. I think our next target should be Shinguti. You know, it's an amazing experience, different from the coast, but quite unique.
I'm super excited to see all of that. I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It was lovely speaking to you, and congratulations on what you've achieved so far. This is only the beginning, actually, because now the world will be, Maputo National Park will be open to more people to come and visit and explore and just discover the most, one of the most amazing places on earth. So thank you for your time, and I think we will catch up again in about another year or so when Shinguti is up.
We look forward to that, yes. That would be lovely.
And it's what we achieved, not what you achieved.